I'm Roger Baker, Executive Director of the Stratfor Center for Applied Geopolitics at RANE, a global center of excellence for geopolitical intelligence and analysis. Learn how you can put geopolitics to work for your organization at ranenetwork.com.
Hello and welcome to the Essential Geopolitics podcast by RANE. The Eastern Democratic Republic of Congo has faced an escalation in fighting after the Alliance for the Congo River, a rebel coalition led by the M23 rebel group and supported by Rwanda, seized the town of Goma in late January. Despite the rebels' announcement of a unilateral ceasefire on February 3rd, fighting has continued, leading to growing fears about regionalization of the conflict. RANE's Sub-Saharan Africa analyst, Remi Dodd, is here to help make sense of what's going on in the Congo. Hi, Remi. Great to speak with you.
Hi, Emma. Thanks for having me.
Can you start by explaining what's happened in Eastern Congo over the last 2 weeks?
Sure. So around January 21st or 20th, we had the M23, this rebel group, which launched a large-scale offensive towards the city of Goma, which is the largest city in Eastern Congo and has around 2 million inhabitants when we count refugees. So the M23 first captured the towns of Minova and Sake, and this matters because they cut off the supplies of the Congolese military in Goma, and it made it much easier for the M23 to capture the city, which they did in only a few days, right? So without a doubt, this is a resounding defeat for the Congolese military, but it is also the most severe escalation we have seen in Eastern Congo since at least 2012 and arguably since the early 2000s. Now, the reason for this is that we have seen this insurgency by the M23 take place over the last few years, since late 2021, but until now, the group mostly controlled towns and villages and not large population centers like Goma. So going forward, as you did mention, Emma, we do have this ceasefire which was announced, but despite this, there is a continuation of fighting taking place in Eastern Congo, with the M23 and the AFC progressing towards the city of Bukavu, which is the provincial capital of the South Kivu province. And as a consequence of this, there's mounting concerns both in the region and beyond of a regionalization of the conflict in Eastern Congo and growing condemnations of Rwanda, which is really seen as being the main driver behind the ongoing escalation.
Is there a specific reason that we're seeing this escalation right now?
Yes, so the main reason is that we have a stalling of the peace process since the end of last year between Congo and Rwanda. Now, for context, the second half of 2024 saw growing momentum towards an agreement between the two countries to solve this conflict in Eastern Congo, but the talks, which were due to take place in Angola in December 2024, ultimately collapsed because Félix Tshisekedi, the Congolese president, rejected the idea of entering into direct talks with the M23. And as a consequence of this, we had a deadlock in talks between the two sides. Now, another possibility, given the timing of the offensive, is that Rwanda took advantage of the change in administration in the US, sensing that the response from the US may not be quite as strong, given that the new administration is just taking over and is not yet settling, and also the fact that Africa is most likely not going to be the focus for the Trump administration.
Can you touch on what the reaction has been by the Congolese authorities throughout all of this?
Sure. So, despite the fall of Goma, Tshisekedi, the Congolese president, he still refused to enter talks with the M23. He made an address to the nation last week, and he did say that his government would deliver, as he put it, a vigorous response to the M23. Now, there are numerous reasons as to why Tshisekedi is refusing to enter talks, at least up until now. He is putting forward the fact that, as he says, the M23 is a Rwandan proxy and that he will only engage directly with Rwanda. But this is a little rhetorical. The main driver for Tshisekedi's position is that he is facing a lot of domestic constraints to enter talks with the M23. Because since the start of the conflict, Tshisekedi has insisted that his government would crush the M23. He's failed to do so, and making a U-turn now would really risk undermining his legitimacy, especially given the sort of widespread anti-Rwandan sentiment there is in Congo. And this anti-Rwandan sentiment means that if Tshisekedi was to enter talks with the M23, for example, on a direct way, it could result in massive anti-government protests. It could fracture his ruling coalition, and at that point, a military coup cannot be ruled out. So for now, his government is fighting on, but it is a tough fight, and it appears unlikely that the Congolese military has the capabilities to defend Bukavu, the city in South Kivu, by itself, simply because of the structural problems that the Congolese military is facing. And if we are at a point where Bukavu is captured by the M23, we have some real risks for Tshisekedi politically at home. And this means that if Tshisekedi does sense that Bukavu could be about to fall, he may review his current position, but it does not seem we have reached this point yet.
You've talked about Rwanda's role in supporting the M23, but what role does neighboring Burundi play in this conflict?
Yes, Burundi's position is quite clear. We have the Burundian government, which does consider the M23 as a major threat. And the reason for this is that Burundi is led by a former Hutu rebel, which helps explain the Burundian government's concern about the M23, which is positioning itself as defending Tutsi interests. Now, this has materialized with Burundi deploying around 10,000 troops, to the best of our knowledge, in support of the Congolese government around the city of Bukavu. And this really goes back to the fact that the relations between Rwanda and Burundi are also pretty poor. Burundi, as a case in point, has accused Rwanda of supporting another armed group, which is known as the Red Tabara, and has launched some deadly attacks inside Burundi. And as a consequence of this, we have seen Burundi close its border with Rwanda. Now, regarding this deployment of Burundian forces in support of the Congolese military inside Congo itself, it may not be sufficient to protect the city of Bukavu from the M23 and the AFC. And if we were to reach a point where the M23 seizes Bukavu, this would be a matter of serious concern for the Burundian government, because at that point, these Red Tabara rebels that we just talked about, they could establish a safe haven directly on the Burundian border, from where they could launch some cross-border attacks into Burundi. So this is a driver for expanded Burundian involvement inside Congo, and it really does highlight this risk of a regionalization of the conflict.
What role does Uganda play in this conflict?
Sure. So Uganda's position is relatively complex. Now, Uganda's biggest focus in the eastern DRC is counterterrorism, and more specifically, it's countering this group known as the Allied Democratic Forces, the ADF, which has some links to the Islamic State. Now, we've seen for several years Uganda and the Congolese government cooperate against these ADF group. And in this context, we have seen Uganda expand its military presence in eastern Congo. Now, this presence has been reinforced in recent weeks to prevent the emergence of security vacuums in eastern Congo as a consequence of the Congolese military shifting its focus almost entirely against the M23. But if we do have this focus on counterterrorism by Uganda, we also have some reports which suggest that Uganda has some links to the M23. The evidence is not entirely conclusive in terms of direct military support to the M23, but it's possible to assess that Uganda may have played a facilitating role for M23 activity. But ultimately, Uganda's focus really is more about counterterrorism. And it means that, yes, we do have these historic ties between the M23 and Uganda, but if Uganda does perceive the M23 as undermining its counterterrorism efforts in eastern Congo, it could take a more hostile stance against the group, even though it does not seem we have reached this point quite yet.
What about regional organizations? How did they view the current escalation in eastern Congo?
Right, so there are two main regional organizations to keep in mind when thinking about the current situation. The first one is the East African Community, and the second one is the Southern African Development Community. Now, the East African Community has countries like Kenya, Rwanda, Tanzania, and the SADC, so Southern African Development Community, has countries like Angola, Tanzania, and South Africa. So Tanzania is part of both organizations. Congo is also part of both organizations, and we are going to see a joint summit of these two organizations taking place today, Friday, February 7th, and also tomorrow in Dar es Salaam in Tanzania. Now, thinking about the position of each organization, we do have some divergences. In recent years, for example, we've seen the Congolese government really heavily lean on the SADC, and we have seen and still have at this moment SADC troops deployed in eastern Congo. Now, these troops, they primarily come from South Africa, but we also have some Malawian troops and Tanzanian troops, at least for now. And this SADC mission, it has been pitched as a peacekeeping force, even though its mandate goes beyond what a normal peacekeeping mission would look like. So in terms of the tactical dynamics, we have seen the SADC forces being engaged directly against the M23 during the Goma offensive, and we did have South Africa, for example, which suffered some pretty heavy losses during these engagements. And as a consequence of this, we've seen a mounting dispute between South Africa and Rwanda, and we have also other countries in the SADC which also have rising tensions with Rwanda. So we have mounting bad blood between Rwanda and the SADC. Whereas on the other hand, the East African Community, so the EAC, it has taken a more neutral approach, and it has called on Congo to enter into direct talks with the M23. Now, this was not well received in Congo, at least publicly, but despite these divergences, we have indications and reports which do say that Felix Tshisekedi, the Congolese president, will be attending this summit in Tanzania this weekend. So this is where we have a lot of hopes that a diplomatic solution can be reached, but it's not clear at this point that Rwanda and Congo will be able to strike a compromise. And if it is not the case, then we probably are going to see more fighting in the coming days and weeks.
Well, thank you so much, Remi.
Thank you, Emma.
Subscribers can read Remi's upcoming article on the Congo in our platform. For more risk insights and analyses, visit ranenetwork.com, where you can learn more about our suite of risk intelligence products and solutions. That's RANE network.com. Thanks for listening.